Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our Chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Johnson edition. We turn to poem 470, I Am Alive, I Guess. And one more time, let's just say out loud how amazed we are that Emily is able to create these first lines that are quite amazing. You'll remember 465, I heard a fly buzz when I died. You'll remember this one that we did just a little bit ago. And then 467, we do not play on graves. Both of those poems having to do with, of course, death and passing. And here we'll play a similar game again with Emily, only there are many readers of this poem that find Emily as very close to blasphemy, if not straight up blasphemy, as she plays the game of trying to speculate on what afterlife might look like. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily is our playlist. I'm hopeful that you worked through our set of introductory comments where we commented in our discussion of the Big Five that epistemologically Emily is a fallibilist. She's often a skeptic as it relates to especially what can you really know about death and about the afterlife, although here she'll play that game. And I'm hopeful as well that you worked through our preceding poems. We've already finished all 469 previous poems. We just finished with 469, The Red Blaze. I made this observation, guys, when we were studying 465, I heard a fly buzz when I died, that Emily was very interested in the whole idea of death and dying, even at the very early age of 21. In a letter she wrote to Jane Humphrey, she said the following: "The other day I tried to think how I should look with my eyes shut and a little white gown on and a snowdrop on my breast, and I fancied I heard the neighbors stealing in so softly to look down on my face, so fast asleep, so still." Now, we commented when we did, I heard a fly buzz when I died, that Emily was very interested in the story of Lazarus, that John 11 story where a pal of Jesus dies for 3 days, gone, and then is brought back to life. And it's interesting, many, of course, theologians have pointed out, where is the interview with Lazarus that would end up in the book of John? What it was like to be gone for 3 days, not mentioned at all ever again, and certainly no one has told us what Lazarus has to say about it. We immediately think, of course, of the way T.S. Eliot plays that game in Love Song of Jail for Proof of No, I Am Not, Prince Hamlet, and then the lines right before to bring them together, the question of Lazarus, come forth from the grave, come back to tell you all. But it seems as if Emily's playing a similar kind of game. What is it like when one dies? So she'll write often in this first person, she's speaking about being dead, but actually being alive. Now, in some ways, of course, Emily is going to be playing around with the biblical text of John 3 and the question of rebirth. You must be born again, of course, Christ will say in that passage. And in that regards, Emily is maybe dancing with, at least, not maybe with blasphemy, but certainly close to it. Let's enjoy the poem. Notice all the central references here, by the way. I am alive, I guess. The branches on my hand are full of morning glory, and at my fingers end the carmine tingles warm. And if I hold a glass across my mouth, it blurs it, physician's proof of breath. I am alive because I'm not in a room. The parlor commonly it is, so visitors may come and lean and view it sideways and add, how cold it grew, and was it conscious when it stepped in immortality? I am alive because I do not own a house entitled to myself, precise and fitting no one else, and marked my girlhood's name so visitors may know which door is mine and not mistake and try another key. How good to be alive, how infinite to be alive, twofold the birth I had and this, besides, in thee. Now, the in thee, many have assumed is Jesus Christ. Of course, there's another reading of this poem that the thee is in fact this poem, and by extension, all the poems that Emily left behind. In other words, you could read this poem as her saying, the only way that I know that I can survive death is my letter to the world, as of course she'll reference it in another poem. Let's enjoy the irony of the repetition of I am alive, 4 times. Did you see it? She'll begin, though, with I am alive, and then she'll take us back to poem 234. The very last words of that poem are, I guess. We called our series Chats with Emily for a reason, because there is such a brilliant colloquial kind of exchange in so many of her poems. I'm alive, I guess. And then she'll talk about being buried, the branches on my hand. In other words, we're back to Whitman's Song of Myself, passage 6, right? The roots of a tree coming, through the ground are full of morning glory. Of course, the flower often used as a symbol for the glories of heaven, right? At my finger's end, if you lay in the ground long enough, you become part of the tree. The carmine tingles warm. And if I hold a glass across my mouth, it blurs. Back to poem 270 with that word. It blurs it. In other words, this is the way physicians would determine whether somebody was in fact dead or not. Physician's proof of breath. In other words, look, I'm breathing. I am alive. In the afterlife, maybe? Or is she talking about her poetic attempts? Because I'm not in a room. And then she'll come back to parlors from 457, you'll remember. Commonly it is, so visitors may come and lean and view it sideways, and add, how cold it grew, talking, of course, about the body. And, quote, notice quotation marks around this, was it conscious when it stepped in immortality? It's beautiful. Stepping in immortality is almost if stepping in something, like a piece of gum that maybe got thrown on the floor or something. Then she'll come back to it. I'm alive. It's almost as if she's trying to convince herself of this notion that she's alive. Because I do not own a house. Well, Emily never owned a house, of course, because she lived in her father's house. I do not own a house entitled to myself, and then the dash, and then the word precise, and then the dash. Some have seen the word precise as maybe the central word of this poem. And fitting no one else. Now, for those of you that like to read this poem as, oh, Emily's house is these poems that we're reading, and that is the most precise Emily will ever get. Very interesting. She'll say, and marked my girlhood's name. In other words, this is the only thing I have to my name. So visitors may know. She's saying, this is the way. Which door is mine? And not mistake and try another key. In other words, she says, this is the way that I am to be remembered. And then she'll say it. How good to be alive. Now, if we're talking about the rebirth of John 3 in heaven, that's one reading of this poem. Certainly many have read it that way. How infinite to be alive, right? And again, notice the repetition of this. Fully 5 times we're going to get this to be alive. To be alive twofold. The birth I had, right? And this, besides, in thee. Now, if you accept that she is reworking the John 3 passage of rebirth and to be reborn in Christ and then ultimately to find Christ in heaven, well, then that's how you read this poem. On the other hand, you could make the argument that Emily is saying the only rebirth I'll ever know for sure, to be precise, is the very one of reading these poems. At 2:8, how you read this poem will depend in large measure on what you think the messages are. Some will argue that nature is always about notions of rebirth, creative rebirth as well. Obviously, when we read a text, think about it, guys. When we read each one of these poems, it's almost as if Emily is alive in some way. At 2b, well, of course, the repetition, right, of I am alive is remarkable. The irony, of course, is that as well, it is a poem spoken by a person who is not alive, theoretically, right? At 3a, well, think about all of those poems about death that we've been working with. Of course, 465. 7:12 comes to mind as well. I can't help but think of Yeats's Sailing to Byzantium as well. An aged man is but a paltry thing, a tattered coat upon a stick, unless soul clap its hands and sing, and louder sing for every tatter in its mortal dress. Remember, nor is there singing school, but studying monuments of its own magnificence, and therefore I've sailed the seas and come to the holy city of Byzantium. I think Yeats was very influenced by a poem like this of Emily's. Finally, at 3b, when was the last time you felt good to say, I am alive? And I'm hopeful that you can feel that as you are reading through these poems of Emily's. Thank you.